Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Tony Moze, and today I had the opportunity to speak with Christopher Rees, who's an IT leader and instructor at PluralSight. And today we spoke about IT, cybersecurity, and education technology. Check it out. Can you give people a little bit of your background from what you did in the past to what you do now?
Sure. Yeah. First off, Tony, thanks for having me on the show. It's definitely a pleasure talking with you. So appreciate that. A little bit of background about me. I started my career right out of college, basically in a completely different field. So I started off in law enforcement, and I was a police officer and detective for about 8 years. Most of that time it basically revolved around computers anyway. So everything I've done, even before that, when I was a kid, started off with computers. So everything was around technology. Growing up, went in the police department because my father was a police officer. My brother, one of my brothers, a lot of family members were. So that was kind of not a mandatory or a given, but it was just it was something that I looked up to as a child and wanted to get into. But not long after that, getting into the field, I started getting into computer crime investigation and technology, related things, crime analysis, those things that kind of revolved around using computers. And again, this is back in like the early '90s. So laptops and cars were not a thing yet. I spearheaded the program for my department at the time and was the first person to bring laptops into the car. So it was quite a transition, and I was fortunate enough to kind of ride that wave or be part of that wave when it was first taking off. But from there, like most police officers, they do, they always have side jobs. They always have other things that they do. So technology being such a big part of just my general interest and in my life, I started looking at different types of certifications and what I could do to basically make some money on the side. And of course, kind of set myself up for the future, post law enforcement. So MCSE certification, A plus, Network plus, Server plus, CCNA, CCNP. So for folks who don't know what those are, there are different types of certifications around hardware, software, computer security, server technologies, and then networking. The Cisco certifications are around basic and advanced networking. So with those certifications in mind, I always had a knack for explaining things and for teaching. So I started actually teaching live classes, in a classroom, live classes on the side, and just really kind of fell in love with that whole field. So over the next year or so, I just got more and more into it and decided, you know what, I think I'm going to change careers here and jump out of law enforcement and get into technology full time, teaching and also working as an engineer. So made that transition, and for a while, truthfully, it was a bit of an identity crisis because you spend your life going through the police academy and going onto the street and doing all the things you do. That becomes your identity. So once I left that, it took a little while to kind of become at ease with with myself again, because you kind of like lose who you are. Like, now what do I do? But once I settled in and actually fully embraced it, it's been a great journey. So I've worked in uh, obviously, as a full-time instructor, a part-time instructor. I did online training. I jumped from there onto creating computer-based training videos on DVD and CD back in the day for a few different companies. And then I had my own company for about 6 years, and I had maybe a dozen trainers that worked for me creating computer-based training. At this point in time, it was still everything was shipped out on CD or DVDs. It was not online streaming like we have nowadays. During that same period, I was also working in a bank as a server engineer, and then went in a little bit more on the security side. Went into a construction company as an IT director, and took over, some of those operations. And like I said, everything just kind of grew from there and revolved around just expanding the skill set. And then about 6 years ago, I came across PluralSight, which has been just an amazing company to work for, and I've been very fortunate to create a large number of courses for them. There's 31 courses so far now that I've created for PluralSight around security, malware analysis, threat detection, business continuity, disaster recovery. So there's a number of courses, and then of course work full time in a very large enterprise IT environment where I manage roughly a dozen folks around the country and another 15 contractors or so. So it's a pretty large team, but basically in that capacity, it's enterprise storage, data protection, and cyber resiliency. So it's a little bit of everything, but it gives you a good peek into a lot of different spaces within an enterprise IT environment. And it's the great part about it is it never gets old. If you wait 6 months, it's like, things are completely different. So it changes constantly. So it's keeps it fresh and exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just going back to what you said earlier, I mean, like, look, like I worked in psychology for 13 years.
Hmm.
If that's a thing that people tell me is like, why leave? Just stay here. You've been here forever. Just hang out here. Like this is where you need to stay. And I just said to myself, like, I feel like I could apply myself into something, something else. And that was a hard thing to finally break out of for me.
Sure.
I
Hmm.
mean, they say the phrase, you're creatures of habit, so the habit for me was getting into a field straight out after getting out of college at the age of 21, all
Right.
the way into my 30s, and just being like, okay, like this is where I need to stay, and fine, this is what I'm gonna do.
Hmm.
So when I finally said, you know what, I have different visions for myself, but once I did, I was able to break out of it.
Right.
So like this is the thing that some people may deal with, that whole barrier. One of the barriers might be their peers, their colleagues, their family saying, hey, you have a job, you've done this, why start at the beginning? There could be some whatever
Right.
narrative behind that.
Hmm.
But what I just noticed is that you were headstrong with what what you wanted, and you just got into it. So your story of how you got into IT is somewhat of an unorthodox journey. You were in law enforcement, then became a technical trainer, then rose the IT and technical ranks of systems engineer, director of IT operations, and so forth.
Right.
So a two-part question is, and I'll repeat it again, of course, is could you let people know what was the one thing that inspired you to say, heck, let's get into IT, specifically being a technical trainer from law enforcement? And then the second question is, what was the inspiration or stimulus that made you get into being a systems engineer and directing IT operations? So the first question I ask again is, just could you let people know, like, what was the thing that inspired you, that one thing that inspired you to say, heck, let's get into IT, specifically being a technical trainer from law enforcement?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So just to kind of unwind it backwards just a bit. I started, I want to say third grade, fourth grade. And again, this is back, I'm dating myself, but I mean, like in the early 80s, probably even before that, 79, 80, 81, somewhere in that time frame. And so computers were very first just coming out. You had like a Texas Instruments TI-99, which didn't even have a cassette, didn't even have storage. There was no disk drives. It was a cassette tape. So I went to a gifted program, they called it at the time, like half a day at a different school, and then you learned about computers, and then the other half of the day you were a regular curriculum. So I was from early on I was working with computers, like from the very beginning of computers. Then I kind of just morphed from there, went into uh, programming a little bit. I had an Apple IIe, then an Apple II GS, and then the IBM 386, 486, like the whole every single generation of computers going on. My parents were very supportive in that manner. So I used to run a bulletin board. I had a couple 300 baud modems back in the day that would dial into the house. So it was basically this is before some, probably most people don't remember, but things like Prodigy and CompuServe, which was way before the internet was around, they were kind of like the precursors to the internet. Well, before that, you had bulletin boards. So basically, you could have email. It was called FidoNet back then. But basically, like one computer, somebody would send an email. So that computer would then call another computer, maybe in the same state or another state, send their messages. And the 300 baud modems were so slow, it would take sometimes half an hour just to send a couple email messages. I mean, it was like really slow. But so then it would hang up. Then that computer would call the next one, hang up, call the next one, and then eventually, almost like the Pony Express, like a digital Pony Express, that mail would get around the country, and things would kind of synchronize. So having all of that in my back pocket and having that, those experiences and just that to bring to the table when the police department needed someone to do anything with technology, my name always came up first. And so Again, I got involved with pretty much any technology project on the police department. And again, I would say, to anybody, just make sure you put your foot forward and just, start saying yes to things instead of saying, oh, I'm not really sure how to do that. Just say yes and figure it out. Because most people, myself included, had no real clue, where the path was going to take you or how you're going to get there. But, let's just say yes and figure it out as we go. And, don't be afraid. So that I try to maintain that philosophy throughout life. Sometimes I'm better at it some days than others, but by saying yes, it just opens the doors to opportunities. As you get more into like time management gurus and so forth, you'll hear them actually start to learn how to say no, so that you have more time to say yes to the important things. But I think early on, until you have a clear vision of what you want or where you're going, just say yes. Kind of throw some stuff against the wall and see what sticks mentality, because you really don't know what things entail until you actually get into it. And you might find that you really love it or you really hate it. So nothing's permanent, nothing's forever. You go off, take a fork in the road, you go down a little bit and you find out, this was a bad idea. Well, then you change. I mean, there's nothing that says you can't reinvent yourself over and over again throughout your entire life. I mean, it's not necessarily written in stone. Similar to you, to your background, like from the police department, once you're there, most people stay for the entirety of their career. Most people don't leave. So for me to jump, I had two small children and another one on the way. So it was one of those things where you have shift work and everything else. It was a matter of, okay, I'm making X amount and I'm working shift work. I'm going to basically miss 2/3 of all my kids' activities because we had rotating shifts. So 2/3 of the time I'm either working at nights or evenings or overnight, midnights. So probably now is a good time to do it, because if you wait much longer, you're going to be kind of over that peak, and then now it is foolish to leave because you're a short timer, more or less. So I decided to leave. Like I said, it was a hard decision. It took a little while to kind of get over it, but once I did, I jumped into training. I was training full time, and excuse me, in a classroom. I'd already had some certifications at that point, but really the fork in the road that really made all the difference. And I tell the story quite a bit, that when we talk about just decisions, and you can kind of trace back forks in the road. There was a training company that were relatively brand new, and there was not a lot of training companies online for IT back then, especially for around Windows and like higher certifications. And I had watched their training, and I found a mistake in one of the videos. One of the concepts was backwards. So I emailed the owner of the company and said, hey, this is I love the training. It's great, but I'm not sure if you knew this, but this is actually backwards. And they're like, oh, wow, you know what? I've sold like, a couple thousand of these, and I've never had anyone find a mistake. You have a good eye for detail. And he said, would you be interested in creating some training? And again, I had never done that before. This is back in 1999. So it was, quite a while ago, but I had never done it. But I was like, you know what? Yeah, sure. I just said yes. And he said, great. Well, then I'd like to, have you try out, do a little bit of a audition, sent me some equipment to record on. I recorded a demo training clip. He liked it quite a bit, and the rest is history. So I went with that company for years before I started my own, and then I came over to PluralSight. But in the past 21 years, I guess, almost 22 years now, I've been doing this. I've trained close to 500,000 people around the globe. Just with PluralSight alone, it's been over 300,000 students. So it's been an incredible way to make a big impact to a lot of people. Some are career changers. Some people are brand new to the industry, or actually a lot are brand new to the industry. And other ones need a certification for a specific purpose, maybe a job title or for a promotion, or what have you. So I've been able to impact a lot of folks from all walks of life, all around the globe, and it's very reassuring and very gratifying just to get feedback from people when they say, loved your training, or loved your this, or loved your that, or it helped me get my promotion or my certification. And they're in, whatever, Australia or Germany, or somewhere in the Middle East or Africa. It's like, it's insane to think that, even though we all know how much of a global reach the internet is, when you actually see someone respond back from, on the other side of the planet that you've never met, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Chris, besides you getting the virtual reach, do people ever have you had a chance where you were hanging out with family, hanging out with your kids, by yourself maybe, and someone said, hey, that's the guy from this? Like, has anyone like seen you in person and did that?
Actually, no. I thought about it once in a while. I'm like, that would be kind of weird if that happened, and maybe someone has and this hasn't said anything, but I don't think so, because for for the most part, the training that we do, and then, you've seen some of the PluralSight training. It's all basically voice, and the screen is the screen. So my face is typically not on those training videos. So there's that component of it. There's a bit of anonymity there. But even within my own company where I work full time, a lot of folks didn't know that I create training, and our company uses PluralSight. Started to, I should say, the last couple of years, and some folks were like, "Wait a minute, don't you? I didn't know you work. I didn't know you did that. You work here?" And like, yes, I mean, it's a huge company, like 60,000 employees, but to find out that somebody that where you actually work, the training you're taking, hey, the guy that sits in the building next to you actually created that training. It's kind of cool. But yeah, as far as stopping me on the street, no, I think it'd be a little a little freaky that happened, but you never know. Never say never.
What was the inspiration or stimulus that made you get into being a system engineer and then saying, I'm going to direct the IT operations team management?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, everything is kind of like a, back and forth route. It wasn't, nothing was really planned that way. It just, I knew that, management is kind of like a natural evolution of being in tech. Some folks want to stay technical and be, depending on what company you work for, 9 times out of 10, they're called, individual contributors or management. So some people don't have no desire for management. They want to stay, technical their entire career, which is great. I did for a while, but then, just seeing, the different evolution of, or opportunities, I should say, with those two different tracks. For me, management had more of an appeal. Like I said, my dad was a police officer, but he was a police chief. So he was, like, the CEO of the police department for 40 years, 42 years he was there. So it's one of those things where, I think I was just kind of wired that way. I just kind of, seeing, my dad being the boss, and that type of thing. So it in the back of your mind, you kind of just gravitate towards that, even if you don't consciously know you're heading that way. And so I just had opportunities that opened up, a few positions opened. And again, a lot of folks, not to sidetrack, but a lot of folks think that, oh, I'm going to take my resume, I'm going to send it out to 1,000 companies, and then someone's going to respond and I'll get a job. And that might happen, but it's actually really difficult to do that. I've done that a few times, even having a pretty extensive background. When I was looking to, before I moved down to where I'm at here in Atlanta, we were looking maybe to move out west more, and just basically sight unseen, sending out resumes, thousands of them, very little response. I mean, you got responses, but nothing that, I really cared for. So every job that I've ever had really has been through networking, and, basically who or who you can connect with. That's why I think LinkedIn is very important, and just the actual art of networking and knowing people, because they can speak on your behalf, and they can, you're already vetted, and, that warm contact is crucial. So to bring that back around, that's how I got over into management on the IT director side. It was through a warm contact, and a position had opened up. They knew I had an extensive IT background, both from law enforcement, computer forensics, and then, just general IT and server management, server engineering. That opportunity opened up. I said yes, even though I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to do that, but I jumped onto that side, and that just led to, other management opportunities down the road. So again, it's a matter of, or a combination, I should say, for me, of networking, and just not necessarily having a concrete picture of where you want to go, but just a general idea of, like, the path. And sometimes I think if you just kind of focus on not necessarily the how, but the why, and, like, why you want to do certain things, or, that becomes strong enough, the how kind of manifests itself. Like, you'll figure out a way to get to make it happen. So
Yeah. How much, when we're getting into where what you're doing, or any other persona, when they're in a managerial level, what is that kind of pie? If you had a pie, what would that ratio look like in terms of being more focused on the human aspect of things versus the technical aspect of things? Like, how does that look, that dichotomy, or anything? Like, how does that makeup look?
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like with everything within IT, it depends, because it's every company is going to be a little bit different. Every company has expectations. Some expect managers and leadership to be very technical and actually hands-on keyboard types. Other ones, they want them to kind of divest themselves from or disconnect from the technical side, and actually not worry, but focus on the people aspect, relationship building, influence building. Being able to get projects underway, project management, finance, budgeting, all that kind of good stuff. So it really just depends. For me, um, I, I would say, since the stuff we work on is I mean, it's a very large enterprise, and storage and data protection is fairly complicated. So I have a good technical knowledge of how it all works, but I purposely don't dig into it too deep. I have a team of very senior engineers that I trust implicitly. So those folks can do the job without me getting all up in their business. So I basically give them tasks and so forth to do. We have projects that we work on, and lots of things to accomplish. But as far as me trying to get in and like actually do the technical side, or the technical tasks, I stay out of that part for the most part. Where it does come into play, when you have to explain things. Obviously, when you have outages, you have issues or incidents, and you have to then explain to management or change control or your superiors, or even like your peer groups. You have to have obviously a technical, some depth of understanding so you can explain things. But the actual troubleshooting and the problem resolution, I'll leave that to my team to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're not the
Mhm.
only individual. I mean, I've spoken to many personas, CIOs, all the way, VPs, and even sometimes directors, and I'm hearing this same trend that's what normally happens, and
Mhm.
that's good. It's just good to know. Like, it's just a good reinforcement to those who are considering anything within that, because someone who is underneath or who's in that kind of like pyramid idea or whatever,
Mhm.
where it's like you have the non-managerial people, you have middle management, you have upper management. There's just a lot of processes and things that go on. And like, when you're just breaking into tech or IT, you're just like, this is what you have to do. And then when you get into middle management, I know it's more of the human aspect. Yes, you have to have that in the back of your head of tech principles or IT principles, but now it's understanding how to influence. I believe, remember, that's one of the words,
Mhm.
influence some of the individuals who are they're going to be working underneath you, or they're going to be working for you, or that you're going to be managing.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's just an idea.
Yep.
You spoke about you coming from a family of police, law enforcement officers, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yep.
I see this thing. I think we've spoke about this very briefly, but I noticed this with military people. I feel military, law enforcement, it's the same idea. We have this thing, we could take a narrative about it, like, serving our community, serving our country. It's the same. I feel like it's the same thing.
Right.
IT, thanks to my friend, he's a IT solutions architect at a banking company. Of course, I've learned this thanks to you and other things I've been learning about cybersecurity. I don't want to give his name away, I guess, but he's taught me some things about the networking idea, and then just told me that when he started teaching me about networking, how IT was founded on the principles of military missions and procedures. Like, IT started from the foundations of military. Is that correct? I mean, that's fair to say, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on what you're talking about. When you say IT, I mean that's obviously a very broad
Very
term.
broad. Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, some companies take a very kind of paramilitary or operation focused approach. To project management and so forth. They have missions and they want to accomplish, and they may take that type of an approach. The internet in general, I mean, which is basically the world's connected now. The internet actually grew from a military project from ARPANET, from DoD. ARPANET created back in 68, 69. They created the ARPANET, which predated the internet as we know it, but that was basically there for military and to allow connectivity or communication in the event of nuclear war. So it whereas like the public telephone network is circuit switched, right? You pick up the phone, it creates a circuit, and that circuit stays the entire time you're on the phone. Whereas internet, TCP/IP, and the way that routers work and across the globe is packet switched. So you can send packets, and some packets might take this route, some packets might take another route. They may arrive out of order, and they all get reassembled at the destination. So the thought was, we create this network. If a nuclear strike or some type of military action takes out one section of our network, everything can just automatically reroute to another section, and we can still maintain communication. So that's really where all that stuff originated from. And there was like 3 or 4 universities that really are the first ones to come on board to the ARPANET outside of military. And then it just grew into what we know today is obviously, the internet as it stands now. So it's in that regard, yes, it all stems from the military and government background, but IT in general, I hadn't really heard that specifically, but certainly the principles and some of the way that they approach objectives can certainly have that focus.
Yeah, I don't want to throw my friend under the bus. He did talk about what you just said, the ARPANET. He spoke about everything within TCP, UDP, the wonderful illustrative process of like the layer 1, layer 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So he's speaking in regards to that.
Right.
So when I say IT now, thank you again for bringing that into light. IT is very general. So yeah, I don't want to throw my friend under the bus, but he did say what you just said, and it just reconfirms it. The question I asked, which is again another side idea, is that I feel, and maybe you could just conceptualize this. Do you believe a lot of military people end up going into IT, or at least going into the sector of where you're in?
For sure, yeah. I mean, it again depends on what your MOS in the military was, or what your background was, and so forth. But like some of the sharpest cybersecurity folks come out of the military. Air Force has a long track record of really sharp folks that jump into public and private sector after they leave the military. So yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yep.
So to the average common person, someone who's not within this space, and not in IT, not in anything that we're speaking granularly about, like cybersecurity. Let's think of like moms, dads, grandpas, nurses, therapists, food chefs, that whole like demographic of people. Should they be taking ownership on the cybersecurity of their devices and business assets, or should they just put trust in someone else? That's a two-part question.
Right.
Why is it important they too understand and practice cybersecurity best practices? And if not, what would be the consequences? So should they take ownership on cybersecurity on their devices and business assets, or should they just put trust in someone else?
Yeah, no, 100% they should take ownership. I mean, security is really everyone's job, not just the cybersecurity folks. They certainly, in an organization will create policy and procedures and so forth, but it's up to everybody to really implement. And just like that, they say, if you see something, say something. It's the same thing with your personal devices, whether you're at home. I mean, nowadays everything is a method of attack. Whether it's a personal device, it could be a thermostat on your wall, it could be a little Raspberry Pi, or an Arduino little processor that people use for hobby, projects and so forth, or it could be obviously your laptop, phone, tablet, whatever. Everything is connected nowadays, as we know. So hackers are becoming more and more sophisticated as well. So if I know that someone is maybe a big fish at a company, but their corporate assets are extremely locked down, or extremely tight, it's possible, or certainly conceivable, to then target something that's a lot less tightened up and a lot less defended. So I might try to find out their home, or websites that they visit, or coffee shops that they go to, and set up a rogue access point in a coffee shop, or send malware to their personal devices or their personal email, or try to hack maybe a thermostat at their home. Because if you can get in that way and maybe infect a corporate device, their laptop or what have you, then when they go back to the office, a lot more, the potential is greater for you to be able to infect that corporate environment. So, or even access corporate documents on the device at home. So yeah, it's very much the onus should be on everyone to protect their devices. IT security is just like everybody else. I mean, they're certainly fallible. No one's perfect. And if you put all your trust in somebody else, then you hope they do a great job, but how do you know, right? So, especially with things like cryptocurrency nowadays, becoming more and more of a thing. If you don't lock your devices down, someone could hack your personal PC or your phone and steal your keys, or your crypto assets, banking information. People use obviously like the same password for everything is certainly a bad idea. And a lot of people don't really understand why that's a bad idea. But just to give you a quick overview, excuse me, if I use the same password for everything, and someone gets my email password, Well, they may not necessarily know what bank I bank with, but they just go to all the major banks and they try to reset passwords. And eventually they'll find one with my email address if they're diligent, hit reset password link. They'll send a reset password link to that email, which they have control over. That may happen 3 o'clock in the morning. They'll get the password reset email. They'll reset the password. You'll never know it. They'll delete the email. You'll never see it. They can then get in your banking account, withdraw, drain your funds, whatever, without you having, really even knowing it until it's too late. So that's just one example. But if they find a password that they like and it's usable, and they actually do know other sites that you've been to, then they can log into everywhere. So it's really not a luxury anymore, or you don't have the convenience of just using one password for everything.
Yeah.
It's really just a bad idea. So a lot of folks who are not really into IT security or don't really give it a thought think that it's much more. It's too much trouble. It's much easier for me to just use one password. It's really a matter of time before you get hacked. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if some of it is a cultural thing. Culture of ages, because I'm thinking of my parents who are almost in their 70s, and they don't even want to do anything with their phone, let alone just like, look up a video on YouTube. When it comes to, at least my parents, I don't know how many other people around their age would be the same way, but if you tell them that, hey, you want to put your banking information there, they already have their arms up going, no, I'm not going to do that. Are you
Right.
kidding me? There's all these hackers. I mean, and I don't know if that was like the folklore back then coming up into IT, like, well, don't put your information out there. You never know, someone might hack it. Because my parents would be quick to be like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to simply go to the bank and I'm going to do a nice written like paper to pen
Right.
type of transaction. But like then you got the people in a younger generation who are just like, yeah, you know what? We put so much confidence, at least especially myself, I put so much confidence in these banks to know, oh, you know what? I'm thinking Chase has this reputation of, we are don't worry, any issues, any fraudulent activity, report it to us. We'll take care of it. They've positioned their kind of reputation to be like, you know what? Feel safe with us. But
Mm-hmm.
like, since I've been taking your course, since I've been learning about these principles, it's still, there's things in the back of my head where my spidey senses are tingling.
Right. Yeah. Let's be realistic. I mean, the banks, their fraud detection systems are pretty top notch. I mean, there is a lot of confidence there, but those things kick in after the fraud is already either attempted or maybe underway. If you take care of protecting your devices at your own device level, then you prevent that from even happening. So it's just another way to help, another lock on the door, if you will. There's a lot of I think old habits, old ways of thinking, like you mentioned. I mean, especially still with the medical industry, I think is probably one of the ones that lags behind a lot still with fax machines and so forth. You have to fax things over. It's like you don't want to put your credit card information or your personal information into a secure encrypted form on a web portal that's encrypted, but yet they'll say, no, just go ahead and fax it over, fill the sheet out and fax it, where it sits on a fax machine. Anybody can walk by, pick that fax up and look at it. So there's no security there. But so, some industries are slower to come on board than others. There's been obviously a lot of advancements around Epic and some of the things in the medical industry that are streamlining a lot of that. But you still hear, fax machines coming up every so often. It's amazing that they still exist. I mean, everything should be done via email or secure, web portals, web forms, and so forth. But we'll get there eventually, I think.
Now you just open a little something, but I'm thinking, let's look at your standard home antivirus software like McAfee. I mean, I say home anti because it's in our homes.
Mm-hmm.
McAfee, Norton, there's a whole bunch of other ones I researched, but those are the big ones that I've known since I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
Can one put faith in these types of software? When can they feel fully assured, and when should they be vigilant? What are some concerns with these types of software?
Well, again, all of those things are as good as their updates and their patching. So if you have antivirus software or anti-malware software, and you never update it or never patch it, then it's really a false sense of security. So you have to make sure those things are maintained. You have to make sure that your operating systems, whether it's Mac or Windows or Linux, are patched and updated frequently. There's security vulnerabilities that are discovered every single day, and some of those things are basically 0 days, which means there's no fix for them yet. And there are hacking entities. There's the dark web, which is kind of an entirely different animal. It's like the internet, but it's not discoverable by a normal web browser. You need specific software to even access the dark web. On there, you can download software. Basically, they run it as a service, basically malware as a service, where you can go in and infect people's computers. They have lists of usernames and passwords, of credit card numbers. There's all kind of things that illicit folks can buy, trade, use for different purposes. So if you're not keeping things up to date, like I said, those 0 days sometimes are harvested by hackers, and then they sell those 0 days to the highest bidder on the dark web. So like I said, whether it's a home PC or a home network or a small business, even large enterprises, if they don't patch and regularly update, then you're really just leaving the door wide open, because you were up to date 6 months ago, but there's been 400 vulnerabilities that have been discovered since then, all of which are exploitable on your machine if you don't keep those things patched. So that's really kind of an ongoing effort that needs to take place.
Yeah, and you know what? When I went to the software boot camp, we were programming, putting things together just on our own individual scale. But we also were able to point out, and I was also able to see within my own repository as I was, putting code out there, that there were there were some security issues, some kind of bugs that were happening. And I within me learning about the cybersecurity, I had to remember, wait a minute, we're building applications, and that takes software people to put them together, and so these issues, these bugs, these security concerns happen within some individual software developer or a group of software developers just writing some kind of code that didn't safeguard or put some kind of some kind of guards or whatever to just allow any bad actor, to just come in. And so I remember okay, so let's go back to Norton McAfee. That's a software. That means that took software developers to have to put together. That means if one or a group of them end up writing some code that just wasn't clean enough, that could open up possibilities to some hacker or bad actor to be able to infiltrate and just get access to a database or somebody's personal information, right?
Sure. Oh yeah. I mean, all of those things, there's so many different levels. You have the software itself, you have the application, which can have software vulnerabilities and software bugs and so forth, right? Things that can be exploited. Then you have the operating system that sits below that could have code exploits and so forth. Then you have the actual physical hardware that it sits on, firmware, NIC drivers, network card drivers and so forth. All of those can have vulnerabilities or bugs. The kernel of the operating system itself could have bugs. You could have a rootkit that's installed. There's just many different levels that can be infiltrated or exploited in some form or fashion. It's a never-ending battle, obviously, and there's many different avenues or an attack surface. So just a general rule of thumb is you want to make that attack surface as small as possible. So general rule of thumb for servers and things like that, you want to just disable unnecessary services. Don't leave things open that don't need to be there. Lockdown ports, it's called server hardening. So you basically try to take away as much as you can and only have the services or the functionality that you need to do the task that server's designed for, or that desktop or whatever it is designed for. Only have those things running, because if it's something that's running, it's not needed, chances are it's not being monitored or even looked at, and then that's an easy backdoor or side door for an attacker to come in and breach. So and that goes for your mice and your keyboard, all those things. All of those have drivers that can be exploited. You can exploit a driver in a mouse, a Bluetooth mice or Bluetooth keyboards, and then get access to someone's server and send keystrokes into that server without the person at the keyboard even knowing that it's taking place. So there's so many ways to get into the systems.
Yeah. And I remember you were talking about IoT in another podcast, and IoT is just, oh man, like when I think of IoT, I'm just thinking like, man, access to just getting into people's things in whatever way I can. If the toaster runs off of IoT, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I that's just one little sliver of intel I could use to forever
Sure. Well, IoT devices specifically are challenging because IoT, Internet of Things, that there are all these different devices, toasters, thermostats, refrigerators. I mean, you name it, washers, dryers, and then there's industrial components as well. But all of these things are designed to be very, very tiny, very lightweight, in both size and function. So they don't have a lot of memory, they don't have a lot of RAM, a lot of processing power. So they don't have very strong encryption typically, if any at all. They don't have a lot of security controls in place. So those things can be very much, a kind of a hole in the dam, if you will, and think you can just leak through constantly. So that's always a concern. If someone can hack a device on a network, they can get into that device, pivot. Now they're on the network, then they can just traverse and move laterally throughout the network, find the targets and the crown jewels that they're looking for. Could be banking information, could be passwords to other things, could be corporate data if they access a corporate device at home and what have you. So yeah, it's definitely a huge problem, and it's a lot. If people really knew the entire scope and breadth of what's possible, they'd probably be scared to death. But the reality is, obviously, luckily, it doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah.
Most people don't go after the small fish and so forth because it's just the time and effort required. It's much bigger return on investment to go after the bigger fish and the bigger prizes.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, their entire corporate or government buildings. I mean, the size of government buildings, I should say, nation state, uh, cyber hacking groups, which have hundreds or thousands of people in that building, and their job all day long is to hack other things throughout the world and just suck up every piece of information they can get. And then they don't even care what it is. They just take it all, and then somebody else will sift through it and try to find useful, actionable things out of that data. So
yeah,
it's big
wow.
business.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, side thing is after taking your course, I became the equivalent of a nurse or a med student. So, like once you get, or even like when I was studying psychology, like, learning all these things, you started becoming very like, you started looking internally. For some med students and nursing students, they say some of them become psychosomatic. And I became psychosomatic in a sense with my devices. So
Right.
I wanted to make sure everything was sanitized in an IT way. Like I had my, there was the one thing where it's like, okay, oh my God, now that I know about these different types of germs and I need to clean my hands. I need to sanitize. Now there's a new way, like you said in your courses, like the whole idea of sanitizing your devices. So I got like really like oh my God, this whole time I've had this laptop, I've had this computer, and I haven't done any updates, And ever since your course, I'm just like, oh my God, I need to start. Like I started getting into reformatting my computer and just getting all into that. So like again, like that's reminding. So like here I want to ask too, and I want to just drill into people's heads too. The narrative before was that, oh, well, hey, you have to care about the laptop. You have to care about the computers because that's where they carry their issues and all their viruses. But what about mobile phones? Do mobile phones need malware and anti-software? Why or why not?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I don't know the exact number or the tipping point, but it used to be where PCs and laptops were predominantly used to access the web, order things online, whatever it is you want to do online. It used to be done with laptops and desktops and what have you. Nowadays, that's kind of shifted, and almost everything's done via mobile phone nowadays. So they're connected 24/7, whether it's via Wi-Fi or cellular carrier. But there are different levels of malware and so forth. Android devices, everyone thinks that Android devices are typically a lot more prone to malware and so forth, but there are just as many vulnerabilities on Apple devices. So it's just maybe a little bit different depending upon the breach or the attack, but both devices have vulnerabilities that appear. And again, as I mentioned before, keeping the devices up to date and patched every time Apple comes out or Android comes out with an update to their operating system it's incumbent upon everybody to update that as quickly as possible, because 9 times out of 10, that update will include security fixes and bug fixes. So that's part of it. A VPN on your mobile device is also a great thing to have. Everyone should have a VPN. There's a lot of ones. There's some free ones out there. I wouldn't use a free one. I would use a paid one. The free ones, you never know who's even controlling it, and now just someone else is potentially seeing all your data as it goes through. So I would look for ones that are obviously, a paid solution. But every time you're in a coffee shop or a public Wi-Fi or an airport, things along those lines, having a VPN on your mobile device when you connect that to that hotspot is critical, because that way all of your information is encrypted, because it's very easy for a hacker to sit in a coffee shop or somewhere else. They can put a rogue access point there and have you log into it without you knowing it, and you pass your credentials to it, and now they see everything that you're doing. It's basically called a man-in-the-middle attack. So they have the ability to siphon off all kind of data off your device and see what your banking details are, or whatever it is, whatever you're communicating with at that point in time. So yeah, it's definitely important to update, patch malware. If you want to have anti-malware or antivirus on your phones, it's not a bad idea. I personally actually don't have an antivirus on my phone, but I definitely keep things patched and updated, constantly, and then a VPN whenever I'm out in, a public Wi-Fi spot.
So I'm thinking, I'm looking at my previous career, and I managed to make a home. I managed to make sense of where I'm at now in tech. I noticed, I want to make my niche in pre and post sales. So that's either customer success or sales engineering.
Mm-hmm.
My why behind that is because I get to connect with people. Of course, I get to sell the product, but I still get to leverage that whole knowledge base of being able to debug and talk things through technically and business wise. So that's
Mm-hmm.
my home.
Mm-hmm.
And I know now that you said it earlier, you said IT is a very broad umbrella concept. So that
Right.
sounds like anyone who's breaking into this field could find a home somewhere, some way, somehow.
Sure.
If you could pick out similarities, because I managed to find similarities that, like, look, I want to work in either sales engineering or customer success because of XYZ characteristics of me.
Mm-hmm.
If you could pick out similarities from working as a law enforcement officer to working in IT now, what would they be?
Well, probably not so much at this stage in my career, but earlier on in my career, it was, kind of the same concepts about just protecting, whether it be people or assets, or, a company's, what assets, equipment, so forth. So there's a level of, putting guardrails around things, and protecting and trying to serve, a larger community, being part of something bigger than yourself, the camaraderie and so forth. So just like you have war stories on the police department, everyone, they get around and they tell war stories about, the things they've been involved with, the situations they've had to come across and so forth. People do the same thing with IT. They just change the narrative, and they talk about this outage or that outage, or, how they had to spend, 15 hours in a war room with all hands on deck because they had a breach or an incident or what have you, those types of things. So you get that same level of adrenaline rush. It's really not, one's physical versus one's, obviously, more on the technical side, or the virtual side. But in all honesty, when I was younger and programming and writing code, even as a police officer, I never really got more excited than when you spend a few hours working on a piece of software, writing code, and then all of a sudden it worked. That it's like you got it. It's like, that was exhilarating. So that part is really that same type of roller coaster, up and down, just emotionally, is similar, I think. But IT in general, whereas law enforcement, yeah, you have obviously some things you can get involved with: patrol, crime analysis, forensics, detectives, so on and so forth. There's different departments. IT has such a broad range. I mean, there's literally something in it for everybody. If you're analytical, or if you're creative, or if you're a problem solver or a people person, that there's fields, and there's nuances within those fields that would apply or appeal to anyone. You could be hardware, software, break fix, help desk technician. You could be a coder or a graphics designer, UI and UX, doing the front end for applications, working with the database and the programmers on the backside. They create the code, you create the look and feel, the actual human interface on the front side. You could be, like I said, database administrator. You could be a software or an application administrator, or a server administrator, or storage and data protection, or you can go into security. Security has a number of different towers within it. There's network security, application security, DevSecOps, right? DevOps security, basically. Forensics, legal hold, e-discovery, that type of thing. There's so many different, verticals within that space even. So if someone is interested and they dig behind the curtain a little bit, I can guarantee you they'll find something that appeals to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great.
Yep.
Yeah. Going into education and consuming it, looking at PluralSight, your teaching style on PluralSight, I would say, is entertaining. I mean, I'm a consumer of it. I'm a guy who wants to start narrating books. Actually, I'm starting my first series of books that I'm going to be narrating. That's my first start of it. But awesome. I really do believe, yeah, thank you. And I really believe that education and entertainment should be fused together. It's reminding me of my history teacher back in high school, where she just incorporated a whole bunch of concepts that were just captivating to us teenagers. So I like your teaching style. I mean, I just think it beats so many of the people who have given IT concepts, especially someone who has a novel ear and eye to things and they're just looking at it. They want to be like, I don't want to say, wow, that's just my own personal thing, but we want to provide it in a way that gets them like eager to want to hear more, like, nodding more and like, oh my God. And they're like reaching on the edge of their seat. Right. Your teaching style on PluralSight, I would say, is entertaining. You have a great voice. You intonate and you enunciate throughout the course, and you even try to crack a little jokes here and there. I'm a fan. Yeah. So I'm a fan of audio and video educational bits done in a captivating way. Who would you say, Chris, who would you say your teaching style was or has been inspired by?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest with you, I like, and I always have, I like watching speakers like that are just great speakers. I don't really care. A lot of times I'll even watch like the really corny televangelists, the ones that are always asking people for money, because they're great speakers and they have an influential style. So I enjoy actually watching them, not for what they're saying, but how they're saying it. So I like that type of that delivery style. So yeah, I mean, I've just like you, I've had teachers both in school and then I just in other walks of life, people that I've taken seminars with, or even within my own companies and so forth, that I just pick up bits and pieces from different folks. I like the way that this person cracked a joke, or the way they can tie two different stories together, or start at the beginning and then talk for half an hour and then wrap it up with the same story they started from in the beginning. Just generally speaking, though, I like to try to put myself in the learner's shoes ahead of time and say, okay, if it was me listening to me talk, why would I want to listen to me? And I try to like give the big picture in the beginning so that you know where you're headed to. I think a lot of times people will teach a concept, but they'll just start at the beginning and just work very serially from start to finish. And the learner never really knows why should I even care, because it doesn't really get revealed until closer to the end. So by showing, where we're going to end up in the beginning, then it's like, okay, yeah, I want to know how I get there now, because that end result is what interests me. Whereas if I never know what the end result is until I get there, you may lose them, a third, halfway, whatever, 3/4 of the way into it, because they have no idea where they're going to end up. So those types of things I try to incorporate, tell stupid jokes, every so often throughout the course. Sometimes I crack myself up even on some of the jokes. It's goofy, but it works, and it's always been well received. But I heard the term somewhere years ago. I don't remember who actually coined it. But you mentioned education and entertainment. They use the term edutainment. So, yeah. So basically, yeah, you try to make it engaging and fun, because let's face it, IT material a lot of times is dry. Some of the concepts are boring as all get out. So by keeping it as fun as possible, or at least as lighthearted as possible, keeps people engaged and it helps it to sink in. And like you said, they want to hear what's next.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. So what's the creative process like for you at PluralSight? Is it collaborative? Is it like a Joe Rogan experience with Spotify, where they say, you have all the freedom and authority to put out the content? Like, however which way you want. Like what has PluralSight allowed you to do? What have been the restrictions? Like what's going on with that, with you producing the content at PluralSight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure how much I can and can't say as far as like the secret sauce behind the curtain, but I will tell you that it's a great company to work for. They or work with. They're extremely, just liberal as far as what you can and can't do. So they basically, as the author, you pitch an idea. Either they have a need and they'll reach out to an author, or the author has a specific skill set or a topic they want to cover. They'll pitch it to PluralSight, and then they say, okay, well, let's cover the objectives. Let's kind of go through where does it fit in with our catalog? How's it tie in with other courses? Is there already overlap? They'll do some of that initial vetting of the process. But once you're given the green light to say, okay, go ahead and create, it's up to you to create the content from start to finish. They don't really have any input or care to have any input as into the actual content itself. They'll vet it. They'll actually review it, make sure it's technically accurate, make sure that the words and everything is, you're not flubbing your lines or you have duplicate whatever's is through the editing process. But the author creates the content, that they create all the graphics for the most part. At least I do on my side, and then I do all the editing. And so I basically send them the finished product. They'll review it. We'll go back and forth. If there's something that needs to be changed, I'll go ahead and change it, re-upload it, and we go back and forth until it's a finished process. But for the most part, and I've worked with other companies in the past as well. It's pretty much the same type of process where you're kind of given carte blanche as to how you want to create the content. It's just a matter of does it fit within their catalog, and does it address a specific need or a specific task they're trying to train people on.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. That's good to know. I mean, that's always a good thing. So going back to your previous official IT days, I know you were involved with computers and such since you were 12 years old, but during the times where you were in law enforcement, you pioneered an initiative within your police department where you did a computer crimes investigation unit, implementing laptops and such in patrol cars. Mm-hmm. So I find this inspirational because on someone's way to jumping into tech, IT and software, they could be working on building skills within their current department.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on this for aspiring tech professionals? Like, what can a non-tech, non-IT professional do to get some on-the-job tech or IT training, but not necessarily be in the tech or IT job?
Right. Yeah, that's a question that comes up quite a bit, and it's not going to lie, it's not the easiest thing to do, just because everyone has full-time jobs, and so most companies don't want you to take away from your full-time job that they're actually paying you for, to do something, maybe to shadow somebody else and kind of do something for free on the side, if you will. But it is certainly possible, and if you express an interest, especially if there's a glaring need for something, if you can bring as a manager or in a leadership position, I would say it's pretty compelling when someone brings you not just a problem, but they bring you a solution as well. So if you as an individual see a problem within your company, and you don't just bring the problem to to your superiors or whoever might be in charge of that, but you also bring them a solution and say, hey, I noticed that XYZ is wrong or could be better, or here's a process that could be improved. I have some thoughts on how to do that, and I'd be willing to maybe shadow the IT folks that need to actually make that happen, and sit with them and work with them to understand, let them see it from my perspective, from the end user's perspective, and kind of work on that side project, and then have that kind of gravitate towards more of a technical side. Or if the company is big enough or has enough flexibility where you can come in on off hours even and shadow folks. I mean, there's more than one way, obviously, to skin a cat, but or you can just simply say, listen, I want to transfer. I'd like to, jump roles for 6 months. I'm interested in a fast track position or course to become XYZ, whether whatever, server admin or help desk technician or whatever the case might be. Can you help me do that? Career development. A lot of companies have career development kind of ideologies, and they're very pro career development, so they'll embrace that. So there's no one size fits all. I think the easiest, or the path of least resistance, is to do it in such a fashion that it doesn't interfere with your day job, so to speak. And if you can find a way to do that, whether it's volunteering, community center, local, whatever in your community, you could even volunteer some time just to get some background experience. But if you can do it within your own job, and kind of sidecar, that experience until the point where it starts to catch fire and people see, oh, this guy does know what he's doing, or you catch the right ear from somebody within that IT department. Now, when a job opening comes up and you apply for it, they know that you already have interest, you already have some skill sets, and you're coachable, teachable, and you want to learn, you have a passion for it. Then you're a lot more, the potential, I should say, is a lot greater for you to get that position.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So in the current role that I'm in, I'm in the sales part. And part of my role, starting to say, from learning your course on PluralSight, I started having IT security in the back of my head. I currently work in sales, and part of my job is outreach. So it's like the emailing, calling, LinkedIn. In the age of social engineering, where hackers lurk everywhere, I have nothing but sympathy, empathy, and all these things, and things in the back of my head. Considering whenever I do this outreach to people, I ask myself, what is a way I can speak to people, a person like a chief information officer or a DevSecOps person, and still have him or her feel I'm trustworthy enough to give a few pieces of information to. This is just like something on the side. Like I was thinking, like whenever I chat with these people, I managed to work some magic spice, because also I think I've been learning these principles and concepts. So they go, okay, well, I can see that he gets it, because now I see why a CIO, somebody at a big company of 1,000 plus or more, right? Or DevSecOps is not going to tell me, hey, we're using this to deploy our code. I totally get it. When people who are working just strictly in sales and don't have that IT perspective go, why can't they just tell me whatever? And I'm like, there's reasons, because there's this age of social engineering, thanks to you learning it from your course, like about the whole idea, like I would be afraid, I'd be, angry. How dare you have the audacity to ask me, what am I using to deploy to the cloud? What am I using on premise? I just think about but I guess still, nevertheless, working in this space, I ask myself, what can we say? How can we get people in this area, CIO, DevSecOps, anyone within this umbrella, and then also my end, to be able to talk in a way that they can feel that I'm not this hacker with a black hoodie over, hanging out in the corner in the dark, trying to see how I could bang into someone's firewall. So again, that was just a side thought. I mean, if you have anything you want to touch upon, sure, but that was just a side thought.
Sure. Yeah, I actually wrote a post on LinkedIn a few years back on like cold calling and just the power of cold calling and an IT manager's perspective. And it got a lot of good response. But basically, I said, similar things where someone will reach out to me on LinkedIn, they'll want to make a connection. I hit accept, and then I'll basically watch my watch and say, okay, I'll give it 5 minutes. And 5 minutes later, they send me this request about stuff that doesn't have anything to do with my department or anything that I manage. And then they basically, they offer nothing, that they want to try to sell me something that I don't manage. I say, no, I don't manage that area. Then they ask me, well, can you tell me who does manage that area? I'm like, so now you want me to do your job for you as well. And you don't even take 5 seconds to understand my role or what I manage, or, the area of scope of responsibility. And then you want me to then tell you, who should go talk to. So I'm like, no, we're not doing it. So I think the right approach would be, take a little bit of time. I know it's obviously time consuming, and when it's a numbers game, sometimes people don't have the time to do that, but do a little bit of research on that person, find out what they work, their background, the areas that they manage. If it's possible to find out, likes or whatever, if that person has a social persona, find out a little bit about them. So when you actually do craft an email to them, it's very personalized, and then offer to do something or give them something. I mean, it's not anything of value per se, but even a snippet or a piece of advice about, anything that would interest them. Always give something before you ever ask for something in return. Because when you're cold calling someone and just, hi, I know you don't know me, but give me this. An IT guy or a manager gets 1,000 of those a day, right? So it's like delete spam. You never get a response back. Yeah. Versus every so often, someone will say, hey, I read your article and I thought it was really insightful. I did have a thought about this, or by the way, you had a typo in the third paragraph and whatever. So it shows that it took just 5 minutes to actually do a little bit of research on you. Then you're like, oh, okay, well, let me actually read this and see what this guy has to say, or guy or girl, I should say. And then then, there's a good chance you'll respond back and say, hey, thanks, I appreciate, the feedback, whatever. And now you've got a door open, and then you can have a little bit of a conversation, but build a tiny bit of rapport before you start to go in and try to sell.
Yeah.
And I think that personal connection, and to your point, making it more human, it goes a long way, because in the era of everything's automated, everything's a bot, everything is a templatized autoresponder or auto emailer, it becomes so impersonal that 99% of it ends up in spam.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
So true. I had a thought about that one too. I don't want to go too far down that, because I'm thinking of automated stuff could lead to some security issue. Again, thanks to your course and reading the CompTIA 601 book, I'm just like, oh, I don't know. I get a little iffy.
Yep.
Going back to education though, I have to ask this because I'm all about education. I think everyone needs to be educated. Education is potential power, as Tony Robbins would say.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe it. I heard your podcast, a show you're on. You did say this one thing, that people do learn differently.
Mm-hmm.
People learn with this way. They learn maybe with images and video, maybe audio, maybe they read, maybe they do this, maybe they do that. I believe that wholeheartedly, especially after working with psychiatric children. They came also coincidentally from special education programs where they, like I started learning that they learn in different ways. I'm a guy who went to graduate school. I could sit in a class for 4 hours and listen to a teacher in a seat. I was in the military where they said, you better sit up, because if I see your eyes drooping down, you're going to go out and do push-ups and you're going to run freaking miles. Right. I don't know. Maybe that's just, again, it comes with a lot of different things, but I have known, nevertheless, that people learn differently. So you said on the show that people process and learn things differently. I believe the same thing too. Each individual processes things differently. Now, what are your thoughts about IT concepts or its overall education being accessible for all walks of life? Do you think IT will eventually be broken down, synthesized for people with different types of learning levels? Or will it be just like the same people who made it into IT yesterday will be the same people who made it into IT today?
I think it's definitely changing with one of PluralSight's mantras is the democratization. That's a hard one to say. The democratization of IT. So basically making it accessible to everyone. So like I said, I have students from all over the world, literally, from the richest countries to the poorest countries, everywhere in between. PluralSight has a nonprofit foundation, PluralSight One, which does a lot of work to making that training accessible to disadvantaged groups and so forth, free laptops and all different types of things where not necessarily through PluralSight, but there's organizations that can give free laptops, and then you get free training, or you can get things accessible via YouTube and other methods as well, not just PluralSight. But there's so many different ways to consume information. I think anybody who wants it can get access to it these days. I think there's still a bit of a mindset shift where obviously there's really not I would say equity or parity, men versus women in IT. So that needs to change, especially in leadership positions. That needs to change, and I think slowly it is. But it's the perception is that IT is so technical, and some folks are just not wired that way. But as we talked about, there's so many different areas within IT that you don't necessarily have to be super technical to still be in IT. With things being automated nowadays, writing code through object-oriented coding and things that kind of take the lot of the hard stuff out of it. You can create code just by dragging objects or bits and pieces onto a screen, and you can put pieces of code together. So you don't necessarily have to type everything in like you did in years past. So those things are becoming more and more. I think the barriers are becoming less and less. AI is and machine learning jumping in, taking a lot of that complexity, or kind of obfuscating that complexity, so you can do what you need to do without having to be a full-time coder or a deep programmer, that type of thing. So I think it definitely is changing. It's gonna continue to evolve. I think as we get more and more into everything is connected, obviously, people are going to start being displaced via automation from a lot of jobs that are available today. Eventually will go somewhere else where they will become automated out of a job. So those folks need to develop new skills to have a way to make a living. So I think just by mere necessity, things will shift much more into IT over the coming years. But it's a slow burn. So I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. But I do think we're headed that direction.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if someone who is brand new to IT and tech, tech and IT, I like to use that just very generally, loosely. I know that as we're getting down to this, I'm just thinking like, yeah, but I just want to ask that someone who's brand new to this area and is considering taking their first IT certification, what should they consider, and what should be their first CompTIA IT circuit, or at least, I'm sorry. What should they consider first? Like, what should be their first CompTIA certification?
Right. I generally would say like A+ is a good place to start. Sometimes that may be even a little too technical for some people. It just really depends on where your starting point is. But CompTIA has a number of certifications, some more or less entry level. A lot of their stuff or starting point. A+, which basically deals with hardware and software. So you learn all about the actual workings of a computer, the inner guts, the motherboard, all the chips and circuits and RAM and video cards and all the different ports on the back and the front and what all those things are. So it gives you a good understanding of the computer from a hardware perspective. And then it also covers some general networking, how the internet works, how networking works, and then software, Windows, Mac, Linux. So it gives you a good breadth of understanding across, pretty much that whole, kind of foundational piece to IT. So I think that's a great place to start. And then from there, you can go into network plus or security plus or server plus. I mean, CompTIA has a number of ones that get a little bit deeper each one. And then from there, I mean, it's off to the races. You can go into, a lot higher level courses. It could be programming, security, networking, what have you. There's a number of certification bodies besides just CompTIA that dig much deeper into specific subjects. But that's a good one it's a good, just a generally industry recognized certification. So employers can know that, you have a good basic understanding of all these different components and, the different pieces within it. So I would start there.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
And then out of all the sectors of IT, where would you say is the most in need from an employer standpoint? Where would you see them looking to fill for those who are relatively new to tech?
Well, I mean, security is always going to be there because and there's, I think the last I read was a couple 100,000 unfilled security jobs just in the U.S. and then probably 3 or 4x that globally. So definitely security, and that's going to just become more and more of a need going forward. So that's always going to be there. And then anything with the cloud, like cloud, whether it's AWS, Amazon Web Services, or GCP, Google's cloud platform, or Azure, any of the big 3 cloud platforms. Whether it just from an administrator perspective or security, there's a number of, there's actually a ton of different verticals within those 3 fields, but anything cloud is going to be continued to just grow, more and more and more as companies either build their own private clouds or they go hybrid or go fully public cloud. So that you can't go wrong in that space. And then, like I said, security is always going to be there. That's going to just continue to grow.
Awesome. So now we're at the fire round. This is one of the last parts here. I have 4 questions. If you could just, whatever comes to your brain within seconds, just answer this. So the first question I'm going to ask is, what is your favorite adult beverage?
Oh, I'd say beer.
Awesome. Name of last book you read?
Well, I haven't finished it yet, but Atomic Habits.
Awesome. If you were to live another life and that life was being in IT or tech again, what department or industry type would you work in?
Again, probably cloud. I'd go all in.
Awesome. And what was the last artist, song, or playlist you listened to?
Oh, that's a good one. Because I basically listen to Rap Caviar on Spotify all the time. So it's just a playlist. So a specific artist, I mean, it rotates every day. It's different on there, but that's usually what I'll gravitate toward.
Nice. Rap Caviar is cool. All right. So you need to write a book and even get on a Netflix special. Like, Chris, I think you should. Do you have any new projects or things that are coming up within the next 6 to 12 months? What are we seeing anything in the 2021, 2022, maybe 2023?
Um, Nothing concrete yet. I've had a few book ideas floating around forever, and I just never had the time to sit down and even begin to start doing that type of thing. So that's always in the back of my mind. Whether I ever get to it or not, we'll see. I have potentially some live teaching gigs coming up. Again, I have a few meetings later on this week and next week to talk about that. So we'll see. I mean, my full-time job, it takes up quite a bit of time, so that's obviously my primary focus. But Security Plus and my PluralSight courses, they have a shelf life. So usually every, like, say, 2 to 3 years. Security Plus, I just refreshed pretty much end of last year, beginning of this year. So that's going to be hopefully a couple year period for that to live. So some of the other courses around malware development, threat detection, threat intelligence analyst, there's some potentials there for next year. This year, I'm so busy with work, I don't have really much time to look at additional training. But yeah, for 2022, I have a couple of things I'd like to get into.
Awesome. And just to clarify, like, where can people find you and even contact you?
Well, PluralSight, obviously. I don't know if you put show notes or anything in here, but you can put a link to my author bio in PluralSight just to see the courses. And then LinkedIn is primarily how I would prefer people to contact me for PluralSight type related stuff, or my personal email, cdrees@gmail.com.
Awesome. And I've noticed also you're also on YouTube via PluralSight. So they have a few pieces of content of you there too.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, everybody, also, first off, I want to say thank you so much for getting on the show, Christopher. It was a wonderful time. And, once again, everyone, please check out Christopher Rees. And thank you. If you guys thought this was wonderful, click a like, comment, and subscribe. And I would love to hear what are your thoughts were the most interesting part of this show. Thank you very much again, and one love.